Welcome to the webinar. My name is Elissa Tucker, and I head up APQC's Human Capital Management Research area. And I'm excited to be talking to you today in what is the third and final webinar in our series on HR trends and the current state of the HR function. Today, we're going to dive into the topics of HR performance, HR strategy, as well as challenges. And just a bit of background. The basis for our discussion today is a recent APQC benchmarking survey of 300 HR leaders representing enterprises with 500 million or more in revenue. Just one moment, please get my screen ready. Okay, in revenue, and that's in US dollars. And these organizations represent a range of regions and industries. So our session today builds on previous webinars, one on HR spending, structure, and staffing, and the other on HR function, process, technology, and analytics. And at the end of the slide deck, I've included links that you can use to learn more about the other webinars in this series. All attendees and registrants will receive a copy of the webinar recording and the slide deck within a few days. So we'll start out looking at how the HR function is performing today. Then we'll look at HR strategy, followed by HR challenges. And this will help us understand how HR got to where it is today. And we'll conclude talking about where HR needs to go next. And I'll share 3 foundational focus areas for HR. So let's look at what HR leaders told us about the performance of their HR functions today. More than half of HR leaders see their HR function as being moderately or less than moderately effective. This stands in stark contrast to the last time that we ran this survey, which was in 2021. And then we saw that 70% of HR leaders told us that their HR function was greatly or extremely effective. So I want to note that last time we ran this survey, we were emerging from a global pandemic, and HR leaders were rating HR highly for having played a critical role in keeping businesses afloat. When we turn to look at the results, today of this latest round of the survey, HR is facing growing and changing demands as AI and adoption transform how businesses operate, how work gets done, and what businesses need from workers. So these developments are making the work of HR more challenging. And I think that adding to this challenge is the level of resources that HR has to work with. In the first webinar in this series, we saw that HR budgets and HR staffing levels generally are not expanding. So this is overall HR function effectiveness. I want to turn now and look more specifically at HR's performance on some of its core responsibilities. So 2 of HR's core responsibilities are providing the workforce that the business needs and developing future or emerging skills among employees. For each, roughly 1/4 of HR leaders agreed somewhat or strongly that their HR function is delivering on the core responsibility. So these core responsibilities are not new. But what is new is AI and AI-driven business transformation. So today, HR has been tasked with delivering a workforce that's fit for this new world. And this really is a huge and complex endeavor that, based on this research, as well as other APQC research studies and our conversations with HR leaders from across the globe, we see that many HR functions are in the early stage of tackling this particular new challenge. So I think that explains some of these results. We're seeing that reflected in these results. Of course, HR's core responsibilities don't stop once it's provided the business with the necessary workforce. HR also has responsibilities for workforce productivity, as well as workforce engagement and retention. For just under one quarter of HR functions, improved workforce productivity has been a major outcome of HR activities. And then for half of HR functions, improved workforce productivity has been a minor outcome of HR activities. So I want to point out that this is at a time when many CEOs have heightened focus on productivity as they're navigating economic uncertainty and as they're watching for the payoff from their investments in AI and in digital transformation. But as we just talked about, HR functions are being tasked with transforming the workforce. So in the short term, there may be a transformation learning curve, and this may necessitate a temporary dip in productivity. And I think we might be seeing that in the results that we're looking at on this particular slide. So when it comes to employee engagement, one third of HR leaders agreed somewhat or strongly that their HR function provides an engaging employee experience. And then when we talk about employee retention, we see on the right-hand portion of the slide that just under one quarter of HR leaders said that reduced voluntary turnover has been a major outcome of HR function activities, while just over half of HR leaders said that reduced voluntary turnover has been a minor outcome of their HR function activities. So overall, HR leaders are assessing their HR function performance in a way that indicates that the majority of HR functions have some notable improvement opportunities. So I want to turn now and talk about why this might be, and then we'll discuss what HR can do about it. So HR strategy is foundational for HR function performance. It defines the HR and the people initiatives necessary to deliver on an organization's business strategy. So let's look at the survey results on HR strategy. Just about half of HR leaders said that their HR strategy is greatly or extremely effective for meeting business goals. Now, this is down from 70% in 2021. So, why the difference? Other than the fact that we surveyed similar, but not exactly the same organizations in our 2021 and our 2025 surveys. So first, I think as we've discussed, driven by AI, businesses are undergoing a massive and a categorically different kind of change. And there's a lot of uncertainty regarding what workforce capabilities businesses need and will need. And this is making it, I think, difficult to align HR strategy with what the business needs. And then second, business strategy is changing really quickly and dramatically, and this is making it difficult to keep even a really tightly aligned HR strategy up to date. So I think that we're seeing this reflected in these particular survey results. And then adding to the murkiness is a lack of HR involvement in the business strategy setting process. Only 1 in 5 HR leaders somewhat or strongly agreed that their HR function plays a key role in setting the business strategy. When HR is not involved in setting business strategy, it misses an important and perhaps unmatched opportunity to gather the business insights needed to craft a business aligned HR strategy. A lack of involvement in business strategy setting likely contributes to our survey findings that just under half of HR functions are able to shift focus as business needs change, and just over 1/3 of HR functions are supporting business leaders in making workforce related decisions. So, taken together, our research points to HR strategy and HR's limited participation in setting the business strategy as barriers to better HR performance. But we also asked HR leaders to directly identify what they see as their top barriers to better HR function performance. So let's take a look at what they told us, as this is going to further illustrate where HR is right now, and then help us look at where HR needs to go next. So, the most common barrier to HR performance is business leaders not understanding the value of HR. This is followed by HR employee skills gaps, line managers not executing HR policies and processes or not executing them in the way that they were designed to be executed, insufficient analytics capabilities, and then inadequate HR technologies. So let's talk about each of these barriers, and we'll start with the first one, business leaders not understanding the value of HR. So our results show that HR is still spending a majority of its time on administrative as opposed to strategic work. And you can see on this slide that at the median, it's a 60-40 split. Um, the administrative demands on HR's time are no doubt hindering HR's ability to participate in business strategy setting, to keep the HR strategy aligned with the business, and to support business leaders in making workforce decisions. Those things that we just talked about. Um, when business leaders don't understand the HR strategy and how it aligns to the business strategy, they'll be less likely to understand the business value of that work. In addition, they'll be less likely to effectively support or champion the work that HR is doing. And a byproduct of this can be line managers not executing HR policies and processes, which, as we saw, is another top HR barrier. So, we've talked about how business leaders and line managers can be barriers to better HR business performance. Let's talk about the employee skills gap barrier, which is on the right hand portion of this slide. As a whole, the most common skills gaps are HR expertise and technology deficiencies. So, how is it that HR staff lack HR expertise? I think that HR leaders are communicating here both that classic need for HR to develop strategic capabilities alongside a newer need for HR staff to be reskilled and upskilled, just like the broader workforce needs to be reskilled and upskilled for automation and for AI. Then the second most common skills gap is technology deficiencies. So this would be gaps in skills needed to select, to implement, and to optimize the latest HR technologies. So this HR tech skills gap relates to our remaining barriers, which are HR technology adoption and using analytics in HR. So let's turn it and talk about those. So HR leaders told us that their HR functions aren't fully leveraging the latest HR technologies. Just 20% of HR functions make good use of the latest developments in HR tech. And this is likely a byproduct as well as a driver of the HR technology skills deficits that we just talked about. In our in the second webinar in this series of webinars, we saw that many HR functions are in the early stages of their automation and their AI journeys. So this is likely limiting the capacity and capabilities that HR has related to analytics, and those will advance as HR moves further along in its adoption of automation and AI. So today, one third of HR functions are using analytics to make business decisions to a great or extreme extent. And I think we will see that, as I just said, progress as technology capabilities within HR advance. So many HR functions have an opportunity to provide greater value to the business. Many HR functions are spending more time on administrative than strategic work. They're not involved in setting business strategy. They lack an effective HR strategy and are not supporting business leaders in making workforce related decisions. And as we've talked about, it's not that HR isn't good at its job. It's that HR, in my opinion, and from what we're seeing in our research and discussions with HR leaders, is up against some really big and different challenges. So at many organizations, we're seeing that business leaders aren't fully understanding the value of HR, that the HR workforce has critical skills gaps. It's not uncommon. HR is so focused right now on developing these new capabilities in the broader workforce. There's not as much time and attention to spend to its own development of new skill and capabilities that are needed. Then the latest HR technology is not being leveraged. And in talking to HR leaders, there are a lot of reasons that this can be, and we'll talk about what we can do about that, but it's not always fully within HR's control to be able to get the latest technology tools when it wants or needs them. And then HR analytics is not sufficiently used. And this is in part because those technology capabilities aren't in place yet. So let's turn and talk about what it's going to take to overcome these barriers to better HR performance. So the research that we've been talking about points to three foundational focus areas for addressing the barriers that are standing in the way of better HR performance outcomes today. These foundational focus areas are moving up the HR tech maturity curve, upskilling the HR workforce, and cultivating relationships with business leaders. So let's talk about each of these and what are some of the steps that HR can take to enact these, to actually take action in these foundational focus areas. And we'll start with moving up the tech maturity curve. So HR leaders told us that the top reasons they want better technology are to gain access to HR automation capabilities and to reduce the time it takes to complete HR processes. So the plan is in place for maturing HR's use of technology with the intent of reducing the time it takes to perform HR processes. But as we can see on this slide, only about 1/3 of HR functions have already automated HR processes to a great or extreme extent. So maturing in this area would go far in enabling HR to shift that balance of how it spends its time from administration to strategy, and many HR functions are on that path. But let's talk more specifically about what that looks like. What can HR functions do to successfully advance their use of HR technology? A quick note, at the end of the slide deck, there are links to additional information on the recommendations that I'll be highlighting in this section of the presentation. So there's much more information and guidance behind what we have time to talk about today. And I've highlighted those at the end of the slide deck, which you will receive a copy of. So, okay. Let's talk about what HR functions can do to successfully advance their use of HR technology. First, HR can implement process management. So, process management offers a systematic approach to standardizing, governing, and continuously improving processes. Our survey shows that only 30% of HR functions have reached the highest levels of process management maturity where performance is controlled and predictable. So, this is a great path to setting a foundation for moving up the technology curve. And then second, HR can make it a policy to consider process fit in all HR tech purchase decisions. So process fit refers to an HR function considering how well technology aligns with its processes. And alignment accelerates implementation and it eases automation. Our survey shows today that 20% of HR functions have this alignment to an extreme extent, and 37% have it to a great extent. And then third, HR can automate HR processes. So once it's improved those processes using process management and aligned or selected HR process aligned technologies, HR will want to look for those opportunities to apply those new technologies in ways that free up time for human HR professionals to provide that decision-making support to business leaders, which we talked about earlier. And the need here is great. Our APQC research has found that many HR functions lose a full day per week to non-value added work. So lots of opportunity here. So making the shift to more strategic work is going to require more than just getting effective HR processes and the latest HR technology in place. To improve performance, HR staff will also need to develop the skills to leverage these technologies and to perform that strategic work. So, our survey asked HR leaders about what they do to train and develop HR staff. And their responses, which you see on this slide, show that investments are skewed toward early career HR development. So, what can HR do to upskill its staff? First, HR can develop mid to late career HR staff. So, putting more investment in this population of their HR workforce and that its development. To get a seat at the corporate strategy setting table, professionals will need to be well versed in human capital management as well as business operations. And this can be supported by strengthening the strategic HR skills of this mid to late career HR professional population. So here we're talking about skills such as listening and influencing. It can also be supported by investing in leadership development so that current and potential HR leaders will have the knowledge and the skills to lead the practice of strategic HR. And we saw on the previous slide that HR leadership development was one of the least commonly used learning and development practices. And second, HR can invest in developing analytics skills and AI literacy across the HR function. While half of HR leaders see data skills as important today, our survey showed that just 33% of HR functions invest in building deep expertise in data analysis and data interpretation among HR employees. In addition to developing data analysis and interpretation skills, HR needs to develop its staff on how to present data to business leaders and how to use that data to work with business leaders to support them in making effective decisions about their workforces. And then third, HR can foster a learning culture within the HR function. So investing in development is a critical step. But HR also needs to create experiences where HR staff can apply and continue to build on their new capabilities. So, practices that we saw are not being used as much in HR from the studies, such as mentoring, communities of practice, these can be useful here. But what also is really important is developing a learning culture within the HR function. So, fostering a learning culture would involve building skills in HR for delivering and receiving effective feedback, making it a formal practice, part of those formal documented processes to document lessons learned and ideas for improvement, and making mistakes acceptable if they lead to learning and improvement. Tech maturity and upskilling set the stage for HR's next performance improvement focus area, which is cultivating business leader relationships. Just under half of HR leaders said that their HR function has strong relationships with business leaders to a great or extreme extent. So, what can HR do to develop these kinds of relationships with business leaders? First, HR can understand the business strategy setting process at their organization. As part of that HR leadership development, HR can educate current and future HR leaders about the strategic planning methods that are in use at their business. We've find in some of our strategic planning research that we've done at APQC that most organizations are conducting strategic planning annually and have been prioritizing SWOT analysis, so strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, along with issue-based and goal-based planning. So those are areas in general to look at for HR development, but it's really important to consider how your organization specifically approaches strategic planning, because as we've talked about, change is happening really quickly, and organizations are learning to adapt to that. And one aspect of that relates to how they conduct strategic planning. And then second, HR can use strategic workforce planning and analytics. So our research has shown that business receptivity to data and analytics can be leveraged by HR to develop strong relationships with business leaders. And we've seen organizations that have intentionally done this and have reported that it has been successful for them. What they've seen is that workforce data and analytics helps them establish credibility, and it serves as a prompt, kind of a door opener for discussions with business leaders that over time help solidify and deepen that relationship and that trust. And then I did want to note from our research that we see that many businesses have a need for this workforce data and analytics. I talked about that strategic planning research, and what it found was that inputs for strategic planning as a whole tend to focus on performance, financials, the economy, and customer needs. And this leaves a gap that I think HR can fill with more inputs that are related and focused on the workforce. And then third, HR can adopt HR strategy best practices. So an example would be co-creating the HR strategy with business leaders, listening for their pain points, gathering information on what leaders see as their most critical needs and what they see as potential solutions. And then HR can leverage workforce data and analytics as a guide to selecting alongside business leaders which HR strategies and plans are most likely to yield the results that the business leaders are looking for. These practices can ensure that HR strategy focuses on the actions that are going to yield the greatest return. Collaboration in strategy setting and planning also builds business leader support during implementation, which in turn can increase the likelihood that they'll guide those line managers to effectively execute HR policies, HR practices, which we talked about as being a top barrier for HR. So just to recap before we get into Q&A and just comments from you on this research, our study points to 3 foundational focus areas for overcoming some of the HR performance barriers or opportunities that we've talked about today. First is moving up the HR technology maturity curve, and this involves implementing process management in HR, considering process fit in HR tech purchase decisions, and further improving HR processes using automation and AI. And then second, upskilling the workforce. And this involves investing more in developing mid to late career HR staff, developing analytic skills and AI literacy across HR, and fostering a learning culture within HR. And then third, cultivating relationships with business leaders. So this involves training HR on the business strategy setting process, using strategic workforce planning and analytics with business leaders, and adopting HR strategy best practices. So on this slide, I've listed links where you can watch the on-demand versions of the other webinars in this series, where you can delve deeper into the data from the entire survey through the complete survey reports. APQC members have access to that additional information. And they also have access to a lot more resources to support you in executing the next steps that we've talked about today. I've included a great start of links here, but if you're looking to go deeper, please reach out to me, and I'd be happy to provide you with even more resources. Uh, so if you haven't already, please use the Q&A feature to submit any questions you have, any comments you have. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this research. I was myself surprised at these results and how much they differed from our results in 2021. And so I've talked to you today about what I see from this data and from our conversations with HR leaders and from our other APQC studies, what I think is behind that shift in the survey results potentially, but I'd love to hear your thoughts and your reactions as well. I'm going to have my colleague, Megan McCullough, come on, and she's going to help me facilitate a Q&A comment discussion with all of you. So again, if you haven't already, please go ahead and submit your comments and questions.
Before we get into one of the questions that I think is going to spark some great discussion, we had another one come in asking to repeat the revenue of the companies that replied to the survey. I believe that was 500 million US dollars or more. Is that correct?
That is correct. That was the baseline for participating in this study. And then we had a pretty even distribution going up to organizations with 20 billion or greater in revenue. In the survey reports that I linked to on this slide actually shows those breakdowns, but the baseline was 500 million in revenue.
Thank you. Okay. So there's some context before I get to the question on this one. So leveraging AI in HR processes and decisions is insightful shifting, but considering the importance of balancing between the human loops and AI, especially this function, which is ultimately a human function, most companies started depending on acquiring and recruitment processes on AI for the candidate selection, making them seen as numbers applications, literally. What do you think about adopting AI in these processes, and is it feasible for companies and business strategies in the future? This is a conversation you and I have had quite often. So I know we've got some, thought leadership here. So please share your thoughts on this.
Yeah, I'll start, and you can definitely chime in if I'm missing things as well. So we have indeed seen in our research that the area that a majority of HR functions are starting out in terms of adopting AI and automation has been recruiting, and there's been a lot of anecdotal, I guess, or descriptive information out there of experiences that candidates are having that are negative related to some of that adoption. So I think it's not necessarily been a smooth road, and we've done previous research that really has focused on the importance and how much employees want that human connection to HR. They want things to be fast. They want things to be accurate. So they want some of those benefits that you get from automation and AI, but they absolutely do not want to lose that human aspect. And so in terms of employee satisfaction and employee satisfaction specifically with HR, it's critical that we find ways in HR to use AI and automation on the things that it can do well, that we don't necessarily have to have a human do, and hopefully from there free up that time for HR to have those more human relationships. So one of those things we talked about is, more time to foster those relationships with its stakeholders, with its business leaders, and that can extend to employees as well. So I think it's a learning curve for organizations, and it will continue to be. But our research definitely shows that as much as there are definite productivity, efficiency, cost benefits to adopting AI and automation in HR, and we're seeing that evidence in our research already. If we only focus there and we lose the human piece, we really will not overcome some of these barriers. We really will not get where HR is able to really give the most value it can to organizations.
I'm gonna agree with all of that. I don't have too much to add, except I know that HR is in the process of trying to figure out what that balance is between the human and AI automation aspect, and just trying to figure it out, as we go along to keep up with the experience of what's happening
Yeah,
um in
yeah.
the HR function. We've got
Real
a
quick, I know we've got other ones. It did make me think of our Moments That Matter research. We've done a lot of research into what employees are looking for from the employee experience. And I think that research, which you can find in our resource library, highlights some of those human areas where employees would love to see, HR connect with them.
And someone had asked a follow-up to this question before we move on to another topic. Is the need for the HR team tech fluency maybe contributing to the challenge? And I think it's part of it, for sure. Not fully understanding, what the technology can do and its capabilities and where that line is between the human and the technology, and what that means.
Yeah, I mean, the broader business is going through this. We hear this all the time in our discussions with business leaders. They're trying to figure this out for business operations. And HR is no different. They're on that same learning curve, except they have the additional challenge that they have a big responsibility in guiding the business. So it's a lot for HR to tackle right now. There's a lot on HR's plate.
Okay, so let's talk about process management. So why are organizations not taking process management as a serious strategic move that can drive better efficiency and cost management on the HR side?
Awesome question. And Megan, you can chime in if I forget some of the reasons. There are some organizations that we talk to where outside of HR, the broader business kind of leaps ahead of process management before they adopt technology. Everyone's trying to get a competitive advantage in terms of using AI in particular, and leaders outside, stakeholders outside of HR can be really anxious to push that process, and sometimes it's very difficult for HR to slow things down and get the processes in order first. Another challenge that we see is just with large global organizations. Their technology landscape that they're starting with is very disparate, and as part of that, their HR processes are very different, and so there's a lot of not only tactical process work to be done, which can take time, but there's also that kind of softer cultural human change of how do you standardize these processes, because that's part of process management is streamlining and standardizing along the lines of what is best practice in general, but also at your organization. And so those are not easy things, but those who aren't, when we talk to HR leaders who didn't have the opportunity to get processes in place, often it circles back around and the initiative starts over, and they get the buy-in. But most, obviously you'd love to be able to prevent having to go through that pain in order to get, to the starting point. But organizations who are able to get that buy-in and do that process work ahead of time definitely have report to us that they're having a smoother transition to not only implementing that technology, but to actually, getting to a point where they're really able to learn and leverage its new capabilities.
I agree with that as well. And just the only add is there are so many processes in the HR function that I think it can feel daunting. To kind of echo what you were saying about, the time is going to take to actually do it. And I think it's, HR feels constantly putting out fires in some way or another. So I think initially is they just don't know what it's going to take and don't want to commit the time, but if they make time for it, it'll save them in the long run for sure.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, next question. One that that you and I don't think have really talked about, but any thoughts around the high neutral responses on our sentiment scales, such as the moderately or neither agree or disagree? It seemed like 30 to 40% of responses for questions, which is almost double for what I've seen in other surveys. So your thoughts on why we might be seeing a high neutral on those
Yeah,
responses?
and we have a stats department at APQC who works with us very closely on how we design our surveys and what scales that we use, and that is something that we're always looking at and fine tuning. So that's something that we will continue to work with them and perhaps even make a change to really help us. Kind of delineate the differences in experiences of the people that we're surveying. As like I mentioned before, some of this I think is just that HR is in the middle of this major change, and HR, just like the regular, the broader business, we don't know exactly how it's going to go. We don't know where we are going. I mean, HR has done a great job, and as we saw in 2021, the results showed that because of the pandemic, CHROs felt that their profile and visibility in the organization had increased. So I don't think HR is entering this complex period from a bad point. I think they're entering it from a point of strength. But what we're going through is just so big and different, and most organizations are still, just understandably at those early stages. So I think they just don't know. That would be, I don't know, Megan, if you have any other thoughts on that, and I'd be interested if listeners did too. Other thoughts.
I agree. I think that they're in the middle of so much that they don't feel strongly one way or the other. But what I did appreciate is that there wasn't a heavy negative, and that's what I thought might have happened on some of the questions. So I think that, while the positive may have been less than the last time we ran the survey, it's not all the way down into the negative field. So I think that kind of just shows where they are in the transformation process and the things that are influencing their strategies
Mm-hmm.
and going forward,
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
my opinion on it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the last question, unless anyone has any more they'd like to submit, if we could backtrack
Mm-hmm.
on the slides to the top 5 barriers to HR performance. Someone couldn't quite catch them all, but with that, they wanted to um, ask, why do you think the business leaders don't understand HR value?
Let me just get back to that slide really. Oh, did I miss it? Yes.
Yep.
Um, Interesting. Last time in 2021, this was also a top challenge, and my my thoughts on this, based on a lot of research that we do at APQC, is that a big driver is that HR is still having to spend a lot of time on administration, and that's not all HR's fault. Research shows that the business is used to working, and stakeholders are used to working with HR in a certain way, and that's a big change to make. So I do think that just the administrative burden that HR has keeps them from developing those relationships where they can have business leaders really seeing the value that they're doing, and really understanding the potential too that is still there for HR to contribute. What am I missing? Anything? I feel like I'm missing something.
Well, I think it's the struggle that HR has had for a while on finding a seat at the strategy table to
Mhm.
really build that relationship and help the business leaders understand what HR does,
Yeah,
because they do know strategy. They can help achieve those business outcomes. One of the things you and I have talked about before is really the importance of HR business partners,
yeah,
both with other departments, but also, towards the leadership, the leadership C-suite level. And how do they really get a seat at the strategy table? And it's a struggle, but I think building those relationships and showing that value, along with trying to shift from that administrative to strategic work and freeing up that time, because HR is a lot of admin work. It is. It's just the
Mhm.
nature of what we do, and managing people. So,
Yeah.
um,
Has to be done well, I mean,
yeah.
that's really important too. And the hope is that technology, automation, AI will help us, move the needle there. But it's not just getting those the technology in place, it's not just getting those skills in place. There's also a cultural shift and relationship building that has to come. So it's going to be a journey, but I think it's a really exciting time. And I think organizations are leaders, CEOs are thinking about the future of their workforces, knowing that with AI, this is just critical to figure out where do you use humans, where do you use technology, how do you optimize both. So I think it's a great opening for HR, especially those who have analytics, who have workforce planning capabilities. Is a great opportunity to be able to provide some of those tools and solutions for business leaders for tackling this really big challenge that we all have right now.
You took the words out of my mouth. I was going to say analytics could be a quick win depending on, the technologies you have today, even before automation implementations, and just showing what different business decisions are made and how HR can help affect that with your analytics tools can be a
Mhm.
great way to start those conversations.
Yeah, yeah, great. Well, I think we are over time.
Yeah,
So,
we'll go ahead and end it. Yeah.
yeah, we'll go ahead and end the webinar. At the end of the slide deck, I do have our contact information. So if you have further questions, you have further comments, you're looking for more resources than I have included on the slide deck, please reach out to us. And we also have information on upcoming events, our upcoming conference, roundtables. And there's our contact information. So love to hear your thoughts, your questions, your feedback. And when you close out today, you will be presented with a survey. I'd love to get your feedback on that survey of what worked, what didn't work on this webinar, so that we can make the next one even better.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you for joining us.